In this lesson, we are going to be looking for patterns in language. So our objectives for this session are that we're going to understand how to identify patterns in language and how they shape meaning. We're also going to learn how to analyze the use of repetition, motifs, and other linguistic patterns. We're also going to explore how patterns in language reveal themes, character development, and writer's intention. So welcome to this session where we are focusing on, as I said, identifying patterns in language, which is really important for pushing towards the top of the mark scheme and understanding how they contribute to the meaning of a text. They are not there by accident. And by the end of the lesson, you're going to be able to identify key language patterns and explain how they reflect the writer's themes or character development. So first of all, what are language patterns? So language patterns are repeated elements within a text that create emphasis or suggest deeper meaning. And these can include repetitions, the repeating of words, phrases, or ideas for emphasis, motifs, so recurring images, symbols, or themes. And lots of students say, what is the difference between a motif and a symbol? Now, a symbol is something that represents something else as a one-off, and a motif is a repeated symbol throughout a text or a repeated image or theme throughout a text. We're going to look at that in more detail later on. And semantic fields, so groups of words related to a particular theme or subject. You might have also heard of lexical fields. There is a very slight difference, although they are often used interchangeably. So semantics is all about the meanings of words, whereas the lexis are the words themselves, of words in particular categories. But as I said, semantic field and lexical field are often used interchangeably, even by language experts. So we also have alliteration, assonance and consonants, so repeated sounds that create rhythm or mood. Now, again, with alliteration and assonance, people can use these a little bit interchangeably. Look, assonance is different. So assonance is the repetition of vowel sounds, and we're going to look at that in more detail later on. And alliteration is the repetition of consonant sounds. But if you call assonance alliteration, you're not going to get marked down by any stretch of the imagination. Often alliteration is kind of the umbrella term that people use, but brilliant if you can use assonance and alliteration to differentiate between the two, because obviously they are slightly different. So as an example, in Macbeth, the recurring image of blood symbolizes guilt and the consequences of violence. And the motif of blood, remember that I said a recurring symbol is a motif, appears throughout the play with Lady Macbeth's obsessive hand-washing showing her inability to cleanse herself of guilt. And as a grade 8 or grade 9 tip, look for words, phrases, or images that keep appearing throughout a text and ask yourself, why does the writer keep returning to this idea and what is its significance? So repetition is key. So repetition is often used to reinforce a central idea or theme, and writers may repeat certain words or phrases to highlight their importance or to create a sense of urgency or intention. So to go back to the idea of blood, in Macbeth, the word blood is repeated throughout the play, symbolizing guilt and the irreversible nature of Macbeth's violent actions. And repetition really is the master of all skill, whether it's in terms of your own learning or in text themselves. We need to remember how important repetition is, because repetition reinforces things to us, whether it's in our own learning or whether it's in text. And we really get that idea as a viewer, whether we're watching a play with the audience or as a reader. If something is coming up time and time again, we need to think about why that is the case. And as an example, in An Inspector Calls, the phrase "we are all responsible" is repeated by the inspector to emphasize Precy's message about collective responsibility. He talks about responsibility time and again. And as a grade 8 or 9 tip, when you spot repetition, just like I just said, consider how it reinforces the themes of the text. And repetition is never accidental. It always serves a purpose in shaping meaning. So motifs and their role, I said I'd come back to this, but motifs are recurring symbols and images that reinforce a theme or an idea, and they often carry a deeper meaning and are used by writers to subtly develop key ideas throughout the text. We never want to feel like we're having things forced down our throats by writers. Sort of excessive exposition, excessive explanation is really dull in a text. So writers find subtle ways to give us hints about their key ideas, and a motif is a key way that they can do that. So as an example, in A Christmas Carol, Dickens uses the motif of light to represent hope, transformation, and redemption, and Scrooge's journey from darkness to light reflects his personal transformation from a miser to a compassionate individual. And as an example, in Macbeth, the motif of darkness is associated with evil deeds such as Macbeth's plotting and murders, and this contrasts with the moments of light, which are linked to truth and moral clarity. And as a grade 8 or grade 9 tip, look for the recurring images or symbols throughout the text. Ask yourself, how does this motif evolve? What does it reveal about the characters or themes? These are key questions that you can and should be asking yourself when analysing and studying a text. And then semantic fields. So a semantic field is a set of words related to a specific theme or subject. Writers use semantic fields to create a consistent mood or atmosphere. So, for example, in Macbeth, there is a semantic field of violence and warfare with words like dagger, blood, battle, and murder, creating an atmosphere of brutality and conflict. As an example, in Frankenstein, Shelley uses a semantic field of science and discovery with words like experiment, creation, life, and knowledge, emphasizing the novel's themes of scientific ambition and its consequences. And as a grade 8 or 9 tip, the semantic field used in key passages, make sure you try to identify those and then think about how they create an overall mood or reinforce the central themes. Now we can also look at patterns in sound. I mentioned this earlier and I said I'd come back to it, but patterns in sound such as alliteration, repetition of consonant sounds, or assonance, repetition of vowel sounds. So I did say there was a difference, and that is the difference. And consonants, so the repetition of consonant sounds at the end of words, can create rhythm, mood, or emphasis depending on the context. It's up to you to identify within a particular phrase what the effect is. You can also speed things up as well, as I said, with rhythm. So don't forget that, particularly with poetry. As an example of alliteration in Macbeth, the witches chant fair is foul and foul is fair. That's the fricative sounds with the alliteration. You can be more specific with alliteration. You can talk about fricative sounds. You can talk about plosive sounds. You can talk about sibilants. So fricative sounds with the F sound, plosive sounds with those like p, d. They're the plosive sounds. And also, as I mentioned, the sibilants, that's the repeated S sounds, to create a rhythmic, sinister tone, reinforcing the theme of moral ambiguity. And as an example of assonance, in Ozymandias, Shelley uses assonance in the phrase, lone and level sands stretch far away. You can hear those repeated vowel sounds. They don't have to be at the beginning of words. They can be within the words themselves, creating a sense of vastness and desolation. And as a grade 8 or grade 9 tip, when analysing sound patterns, consider the effect they have on the tone and mood of the passage. Don't just feature spot, don't just say that you've identified them. We must comment on the effect. How do they contribute to the overall impact of the text? Like I've said many times before, things are not there by accident, and it's our job to identify the effects of those. So the effect of patterns, bringing us on nicely to that now. Language patterns are not just for decorative purposes. They are there and carefully chosen to affect the reader's interpretation of the text. Patterns in language can create tension, emphasize key themes, or provide insight into character development. And as an example, in Macbeth, the recurring imagery of blood, I know we've talked about this already, and darkness, so thinking about two of the patterns there together, create an oppressive atmosphere, reminding the reader and the audience of the moral consequences of Macbeth's ambition. And these patterns shape the reader's perception of Macbeth as increasingly consumed by guilt. And as a grade 8 or grade 9 tip, when discussing language patterns, always explain their effect on the reader. How do they help the writer communicate their themes or ideas more effectively? And analysing patterns. So as an example, in Macbeth, Shakespeare repeatedly uses the motif of blood to symbolise guilt and the consequences of violence. From the moment Macbeth murders Duncan, the image of blood becomes a central part of his and Lady Macbeth's psychological torment. Lady Macbeth's obsessive attempts to wash the blood from her hands in Act 5 highlights the inescapability of the guilt, and the repetition of the word blood, the noun blood, throughout the play reinforces the idea that violence leaves an indelible mark, so a mark that cannot be removed. That is a great word there, on the conscience, and this recurring pattern creates a growing sense of dread as the characters become more entangled in their crimes, so kind of more tangled up in their crimes. And as a grade 8 or grade 9 tip, always link the language patterns that you identify to the themes or messages of the text. Explain how these patterns enhance the reader's understanding of the writer's intentions. And then some common pitfalls now. So, overlooking patterns. If you know that they are there, please talk about them, because it's rare that students do this. And I'm always so impressed when students are identifying patterns in language, because it shows they're not just thinking about one quotation or one scene, but they are being evaluative. They are thinking about the text as a whole. And evaluation is a really key skill. So don't just focus on individual words. Look for repeated themes, symbols, and motifs throughout the text. And failing to explain the significance. So identifying a pattern is not enough. I've mentioned this before, but to reinforce it again, remember I talked about repetition and how it's important. I do a lot of repetition in these lessons to really get these ideas across to you. You must explain its purpose and how it enhances meaning. And don't ignore the effect on the reader. Consider how the pattern shapes the reader's perception of a character, theme, or event. And as a grade 8 or 9 tip, when identifying language patterns, always ask yourself, why is the writer repeating this idea? What effect does it have on the audience or on the reader? So just some final thoughts to leave you with now. Language patterns play a crucial role in revealing themes, character development, and the writer's intentions. Always look for recurring symbols, motifs, and phrases. And patterns are key to understanding a writer's deeper message. So we're not just looking for the surface message. Remember, we are pushing towards those top grades, grades 7, 8, and 9. We want to be looking for the writer's deeper meaning. And by recognizing and analyzing these patterns, you can unlock a richer understanding of the text. So that brings us to the end of this lesson. If you have found it useful, be sure to check out the other free sessions that are really going to push you towards the top of the mark scheme, and check out the website as well, because we've got hundreds of lessons and resources that again serve to push you to the top of the mark scheme. And don't forget to follow us on social media as well.